The Chicago Bears offensive line had some good updates coming out of practice today based on the Tevin Jenkins injury. Unfortunately, though, Darnell Wright now finds himself getting an MRI tonight. We have more updates there, but we get to see more depth, guys. And before we get into all of that, we have a very special guest today. Two-time All-Pro, two-time Pro Bowler, and Hall of Famer Jim Covert from the Chicago Bears joins us tonight as our special guest. Jim, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Nick. Appreciate it.
Absolutely, man. Excited to have you on. And I see you wearing the hat, the Pro Hall of Fame hat, repping it for Mongo tonight. Hopefully he finds out. Jim, speaking of Mongo real quick, what was it like practicing against him all those years?
Well, I always like to say that there was probably a, 4 or 5 year period there in the mid 80s that I don't think anybody played the inside tackle position better than Steve McMichael. I mean, he was a menace. I mean, he could rush the passer. He was tough. He practiced like he played. And he was just one heck of a football player and deserving of the Hall of Fame. I said it in my Hall of Fame speech a couple of years ago that he deserved it. And I believe he does. I believe that, he was, Dan Hampton was an incredible player. Richard Dunn was an incredible player, Mike Singletary, but excuse me. I mean, Steve McMichael was kind of the glue of that defense. He made it work. He was the guy that held off the jump through so the linebacker didn't get blocked. He was able to rush the passer, put up consistent numbers for quite a while and played in a heck of a lot of football games. So, I mean, I'm really hoping and praying that he gets the call tonight.
And you were telling me a little story beforehand when you got the call. What was that like for you? I thought the story was pretty funny because you said you weren't expecting it, but what happened that night that you got the call?
Well, I think that night I was working. I was in San Francisco for the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference. And so I had clients and customers and working, and we had a cocktail reception that night. So I was trying to keep my mind off it, but I knew, it was going to be announced. And then since it was in San Francisco, I got a call at like 3:30 in the morning, and I think it might have been 4:30, 3:30, 4:30, whatever it was, something like that. And, picked up the phone. It was David Baker from the Hall of Fame. And I actually thought he was calling me to tell me that I didn't get in. So I was trying to be prepared for that. But then, thank God, he reversed course and told me that I was, just got elected to the Hall of Fame. So, I just think that, when you wait so long like I did, there comes a point where you try not to think about it. Then there comes a point where you think it's in the back of your mind, and then you try to block it out, but it's always there. And you think you're going to react a certain way when you get the call. But then when you get the call, it's like your whole life flashes in front of you in like 2 seconds. You start thinking about your wife and kids and your parents, your family, your brothers and sisters, all the guys you played high school football with, Pop Warner football with, pro football with, college football with. And it's just a really, really emotional time. So, and in that whole year, my wife always referred it to as the whole year, the summer of Jimbo, because it just kept going on and going on. And she goes, it's coming to an end here pretty soon, guy. But it's just a tremendous feeling. And when you get to celebrate it with family and friends and teammates, that even makes it that much more special.
That's awesome. And you were very well deserving of it because you were a huge part of that, 85 Bears offensive line. I mean, the entire time you were on the team. Besides 1985, Jim, before we get into kind of the current roster, who was your favorite teammate on that offensive line?
Well, I don't think I had a favorite teammate on the offensive line. I think in an offensive line is kind of interesting, Nick, because I think it's more a team within a team. So in order for an offensive line to work well together, they have to be close. And, it's 5 guys, and it's almost like a team within a team. And so, we went out for Thursday night dinners. We socialized a lot. We tried to learn from each other. And then it got to the point where I didn't even have to ask Mark Bortz next to me what he was doing. I knew, our calls were really pretty pithy. Like we didn't have a lot of calls because we knew exactly what each other was going to do. And same thing with Jay and same thing with, Tom and Keith. So, when you play a long time together, you become a pretty solid unit, and then you become a great unit. And I think that, you know, we have Walter Payton, obviously, but we led the league in rushing, 4 years in a row, right? And I think we finished second twice and third once in my career. And I think it's all because of the continuity we had together and the familiarness we had with each other.
That's awesome. And, and that's, good to hear. And that's something that hopefully we see from this unit. The unit's been together now for a few years, within Tevin Jenkins, Whitehair, Braxton Jones. They're starting to gel together a little bit, and hearing that importance of what it means to all work together is very key. And speaking of the current Chicago Bears offensive linemen, Jim, out of any of them, who would you want to, sit down and have a beer with and just talk about being offensive linemen?
Well, I'm partial to left tackle, so I would probably want to sit down with Braxton Jones. I got a chance to meet him a little bit, talk to him. I think he's one heck of a kid, and I think he's going to be a great player in this league. I mean, he started as a rookie, which is really difficult to do in the NFL, especially playing left tackle. I know I did it. And, just the system and learning it, and then having to play against the best defensive players, because those players always line up on the right side of the defense, which you have to block them. And, a lot of times you're expected to block people by yourself. So, it's difficult. And I think he did a really nice job last year. I know he's worked a lot on his technique. I know he's worked in the offseason with Olin Kreutz, who's one hell of a teacher, and obviously should be a pro football Hall of Famer as well. And when you see that, I think that you're going to see some good things out of him this year. I think he's going to have a really good year.
So you're predicting the big jump for Braxton Jones this upcoming year. A lot of people have been questioning it. The team last year obviously didn't do well, but he did well individually. But you're thinking that Braxton Jones is ready to take it to that next level?
Yeah, I think so. I think he had a few problems last year, maybe a little bit with the bull rush and other things. I mean, but I think he'll correct that. And I think, running the football is a will, right? Running the football is a want. I mean, you have to want to do it, right? And you have to commit to it. And, I think nowadays it's a little bit different. I mean, back in the 80s, and before that, obviously, it was point of attack, right? So everything was upfield steps. Everything was hit the hole. Everything was, if you're going to run it in the 5-hole, you're running the 5-hole. You're running the 4-hole, you're running the 4-hole. The only way you would bounce it around or kick it back inside is if you had a cutback and it was a natural kind of flow thing, or this was just bad blocking. And, now everything's zone blocking, right? So it's all lateral stepping. It's all kind of, pushing a guy past the hole, and then the quarterback or the running back just try to find softness. I mean, it's different. So to think that you're going to be blowing guys off the ball all the time, that's just not the scheme, so it's a little different. But from what I've seen from him, I really like, and, I think he could be a hell of a player in this league. I think he had a nice year last year, and he could play in this league for a long time.
Love that answer, because that's something that we want to hear as Bears fans. And Ryan Poles is doing a pretty good job at hitting on linemen so far. Though, we haven't seen, we're ready to see Darnell Wright enter the NFL. Tevin Jenkins moving over to guard was a big change for him as well. But overall, it's working out pretty well. And Jim, going back to what worked out really well, obviously the 1985 Bears, the 15-1 team winning the Super Bowl 46-10 against the Patriots. What was your favorite moment from that season besides winning the Super Bowl?
You know what? I think my favorite moment from that season, was going out to San Francisco and playing them. I mean, when they beat us in 1984 in the NFC Championship, I mean, they whipped up on us pretty well, and it was embarrassing. And I think that it stuck with a lot of guys. And, after the game, you had several 49er players saying, like, bring an offense next time. And I think that really impacted us. I mean, we were committed on the plane ride on the way home that we were gonna compete and win the Super Bowl. And I think everybody, that was their, vow after that to do that. And I mean, you could see this team was just pointing to that game. And then when we got out there, I mean, we brought an offense that time, and I think they saw that, and we got respect throughout the league, right? And I think that when you saw that combined with our defense and the way our offense was playing, I mean, we were pretty formidable. So that was probably my favorite other non-Super Bowl moment because we arrived, and showed people that we were going to compete for the Super Bowl.
And clearly that happened, and, minus the one game in Miami, which, didn't go in the Bears' favor, but being one of the greatest playoff teams in NFL history, being one of the greatest defenses in NFL history, and overall team, very impressive. And one more question about that team, Jim, for you is what was it truly like to be with Jim McMahon in the locker room, on the plane? He had a crazy personality, like super fun guy, but from being his, left tackle, what was that like? What the relationship between you guys?
Well, we had a great relationship with Jim. I know he loved being around the offensive line. He kind of felt he was an offensive lineman, and he wanted to be part of us. And he would go out with us on Thursday nights, and we loved having him around. I mean, he just had an innate ability to lead people. Like he just had that skill set. That's a hard thing to do. People followed him, and he knew that. So, and we had a lot of confidence in him, and he had a lot of confidence in his own ability. My only regret is that he just couldn't stay healthy. And you wanted to keep him in the pocket, you wanted to keep him there. And I always say when you go back to those '80s years and you look at someone like Joe Montana, who is arguably one of the greatest quarterbacks that ever lived. When he would see a rush coming towards him and he didn't think he can get out of the pocket, he would just take the sack. He would just live to fight another day. He wasn't going to go and, try to get out of the pocket and get hit and get hurt. Jim wasn't like that. So if he saw that, Jim was headed to the sideline. He was going to try to beat some guy to the sideline. He was going to try to get the first down. He's going to try to juke this guy. And then he did, he wasn't a big guy. So he's like 6 foot, 6'1", maybe 185 pounds. And he was getting beat up a little bit. And so for me, you want to keep him in the huddle, but that was what made him special, or keep him in the pocket. But that was what made him special, was what he did. And he couldn't take that away from him. So unfortunately, he just couldn't stay healthy. And I'm convinced if he stays healthy, we win another Super Bowl at least, because the next year in '86, people forget, we were 14-2 in '86, and we were a 50-yard field goal away from being 15-1 2 years in a row. And Jim only played half the year. So I think if he would have stayed healthy for that year, we repeat that year. I'm convinced of that. And so, that was a shame that had to happen. And one of the greatest Chicago Bears ever, in my opinion.
You're not the first person to bring up 1986. I've had a few people on the show, and they're like, a lot of people forget about how great that season was too. And, going back to Jim real quick, speaking on that, is when that dirty hit happened after the play where Jim got head first into, Soldier Fields. I believe it was AstroTurf at the time. When Jim that's when everything changed. And Jim said that in his interview a few years back on NFL Network. Were you on the field? Do you remember that moment? What was going on the sideline? Just overall, what was everyone's reaction when they saw that play happen?
Yeah, I was on the field, and I saw, all I remember is I just heard this big roar, and then I looked over, and I saw, Charles Martin standing over Jim McMahon. And I just, I took about a 15-yard head start, and I hit Charles Martin as hard as I could and knocked him over. But you got to remember, back then they only had 1 or 2 cameras on the field. Nowadays you would have saw that. So nobody saw it unless on TV, unless they were at the game. Right. And so what happened was they threw the flag. And the official came over and he said, you know what it is, coach? It's offsetting penalties, right? Because I had a penalty hit him, and Charles Martin, hit Jim McMahon. And Coach Dickett goes, what are you talking about? Offsetting penalties? My guy might be dead, So and it was the official that did that game. He wrote a book about that, and I just can't remember his name right now off the top of my head. You guys, you could probably do a little research on it, put it in your comments. But the official that did that game wrote about it in a book. And he said that officially the right call was offsetting penalties. He said, but he just believed that I was protecting the quarterback, and he picked up the flag on me, and they threw Charles Martin out of the game. And so pretty interesting, but no one really saw that other than if they were at the game, right? And so it's pretty interesting. I can't remember the official's name, but pretty famous official. And he officiated the Super Bowl that year, head official.
Wow. See, that's why I had to ask you that question, because I had no idea that you went up after and tried to make things right, because that was such a dirty play. All they do, because the camera went away right after from all the highlights that I've ever found of that play.
You don't see that. So when I saw him over top of him, I just took off and hit him pretty hard and knocked him over and jumped on top of him, and Keith Van Horn jumped on top of him, but you couldn't see that. Right. And then the people from the benches started coming over, but you couldn't see that on the thing because all the cameras were off then, so it was pretty interesting. But like I said, the official got the Super Bowl because of that call, because he made the right call. He said it was the wrong call, but the right call, which was interesting.
The wrong moral call, but the right call by the book.
Yeah, exactly.
Is one of those things. Definitely nowadays, I think do you think the officials would still probably call a penalty on you today? I would assume yes.
They probably still would, but you would never have that happen because they protect the quarterback so much. The first part never would have happened. And Jerry Markbright, that was the official. I knew I would get it eventually.
There it is.
Yeah, Jerry Markbright was the official, and he ended up writing a book about it. So if you get Jerry Markbright's book and you read about it, you'll read that whole thing, and it's really interesting how he explains it in detail, which was really cool.
I'm gonna have to get that. I got 2 books on the playlist right now. I'm gonna put that one on, and then Eric Kramer is releasing his book in the next couple months, and I've become pretty close with him, so I'll have to get you a copy of that as well. Eric's coming back on the show in a couple weeks here to talk about it.
Good.
But I'll have to throw it your way. I know. I think you guys overlapped for a year? Did you not? Or were you guys 1 year off?
I was gone by the time he got there. I think he came in early 90s, and my last year was 91. And my last year playing was 90. I was on the IR in 91. I retired in 92.
Gotcha. Yeah, he was at 93. So you guys just missed each other by a few seasons. But he's coming out with a book. So I guess I got 2 books, and I'm not much of a reader unless it's about sports. Yeah. So I guess these 2 are going to be keeping me entertained on my travels. But Jim, let's kick it over to the new Bears, and a couple things I want to ask you about, because injuries happen. Like you were saying, you were on injured reserve during the end of your career, and Tevin Jenkins is out for a few weeks with double calf strains. How that happened, we don't know, because he was totally fine after Thursday's joint practice with the Colts, and then the news dropped Sunday night. Right. From a, Bears fans aren't easy to deal with. We kind of over-exaggerate a lot, or we have crazy reactions to things. And a lot of people are saying he's never healthy, he's a bust, we should get rid of him. And I think there's always 2 sides to every story. I think Tevin Jenkins has a ton of potential, and also, at least it wasn't his back this time. That's kind of how I was looking at it, because that's obviously big for him. From being a lineman yourself, dealing with injuries, dealing in the trenches, and how much you put your body through, what should fans know about this injury, and should they back off the gas pedal a little bit?
Injuries are tough, and honestly, for a guy to play, I'd say 8 to 10 years in this league, and miss 1 or 2 games, they're like freaks of nature. It just doesn't happen. I mean, there's so many variables that happen where you're 1 second too fast or 1 second too slow, and a whole pile drops on the back of your legs, right? And then you blow out your ankle, you tear your Achilles. This is this game, and so it's very difficult to stay healthy for a long period of time. And I kind of look back on it and say, like Anthony Munoz, I don't think he had a single healthy full season at USC, maybe 1, maybe one, because he had several knee injuries and everything like that. And then he goes and plays like 14 years at Cincinnati and missed very little games, right? So how does that happen? I mean, then my first, I missed one game in 3 years I started at Pitt, and I probably could have played in that game. They held me out. And then I missed one game in my first 5 years with the Bears, and I probably could have played in that game. So that's really almost like 8 years without missing a game, right? And then, I got nicked and my ankle and my shoulder, and then, 88, I hurt my back and on an IR for half the year. Then I came back and played, and half that year, and then 2 more years, and I got hurt again. So I kind of look at it as you got to give people an opportunity to get healthy. He's young in his career yet. He could rip off 10 years in a row without missing a game, and people will forget all about this. So you just don't know. But injuries are part of this game, and I know it's frustrating for fans because they were probably frustrating with me when I missed some time too. But there's nothing you could do about it. It's a brutal game.
And especially in the trenches. I agree. And Jim, what was the hardest injury for you that you had to deal with that most people might not think about? I mean, you were saying your shoulder, you were saying your ankle, but which injury do you remember the most that was overall the most impactful on your career?
I dislocated my elbow in Houston in '86, and we were playing Houston in the Astrodome. And that was when they still had, excuse me, that's when it was baseball season. So they still had, dirt in the field, in the infield. And it was the last play of the half. And they threw a little jet route to Lou Barnes, and he got hit at the same time the ball came, and the ball popped back towards the offensive line. So I, obviously first instinct is to go after the ball, right? So I went after the fumble. And all I can remember is I had my elbow out like this, and I could see a helmet like in slow motion going right here. It had a little oil derrick on it, and boom, went like this. So I came out, and my elbow was kind of like this, and so I come off the field, and it was the last play of the half, and so we go in the locker room, and luckily it didn't go all the way out. It was like a sublex, they call it, so it was just nasty. And they taped it up with elasticon tape, and then they put white tape on it, and then they put an elbow pad on it, and then I took a couple painkillers, and I went back out and played the second half, and I don't really remember much of the second half other than I had to block a guy without a left arm. And then that next morning I woke up and I was black and blue all the way from my armpit all the way to my wrist. So I didn't miss a game. I didn't miss a start, but it was hard for a couple of weeks. Believe me, when you're playing left tackle without a left arm, that was a rough one. That was probably, I had all kinds of other ones that kept me out, like my back and other things, and it was painful. But this thing, to play with it was the hard thing, because I hit this nerve right here too when I did it. So like these two fingers were numb all the time, and then when I would play, they would come back and like snap, like, be all mangled and stuff. At the end of the game, I would like one would be over here and I'd have to put it back. And it was gnarly for a while. But
oh my God. Like I played Pee-wee lineman and I broke all my fingers, but I've never had that kind of situation. Oh my God. Like I'm just imagining waking up and your whole arm is black and blue. Was that your call to stay out there, or was that Dicka's call to keep you out there?
No, I wanted to play, and painkillers helped. So I didn't have to worry about that. And then it's a little bit different than today. I don't think I don't think guys would do that today, but believe me, there's still a lot of tough guys playing in the NFL. Don't get me wrong, but back then it was kind of a rite of passage. I mean, you wanted to show your teammates how tough you were. So you did stuff like that, and I think I wouldn't change a thing about my career. I would not change a thing. I'd do it all over again the same way. The only thing I might have did a little bit different, I would have done a little bit different, is maybe been a little bit smarter when in distinguishing the difference between pain and injury. Um, you can play with pain, but when you're injured and you go out in the field, you're only going to hurt yourself even worse. So that's difficult for guys to distinguish the difference sometimes.
And I assume the elbow one was one of those decisions you wish you might have gone the other way with, or was there another injury?
Yeah, there's a couple other ones too, but we could talk about injuries all night long. I could fill your whole podcast with this thing. So yeah, you don't want to talk about that. It'll probably make people sick to hear about them. But yeah, I had, I sublexed my hip one time, had to get a big injection in that, and toes and my back and my shoulders and everything. So I mean, that was tough. So I mean, probably the healthiest year I was in my career was like 83, 84, 85. Those are the real healthiest years I was there, and didn't really have to mess with too many injuries, which, like I said, that's what people have to understand, that they come in chunks, and unfortunately, hopefully these guys will get past it.
Absolutely. And thanks for sharing those, because I'm sure some people might not even know that you had those because they were so much less commonly talked about. Injuries now are so blown out, like not blown out of proportion, but put out there for fantasy owners, for just teams as a whole, for betting purposes. It's they definitely have more of an impact on the game. So if I'm sure a lot of people are going to be in the comment section going, man, I had no idea about that. So I'll keep a lookout there for you, Jim. But 2 more questions for you before we close out. And again, really appreciate you coming on. My first question before we close is, what do you think about this unit right now? Before, without injuries, you had Braxton Jones, you hit on him a little bit, but then you had Cody Whitehair, the veteran, at left guard. You had Tevin Jenkins at left guard. Then you have the veteran Cody Whitehair at center. Right guard Nate Davis, who we brought in from the Tennessee Titans, and then right tackle Darnell Wright. What do you see in this unit? Do you see a lot of potential in them? Do you see some things that they maybe have to work on that fans might also start looking out for?
I mean, the little that I've watched them, Nick, I think that the one thing Ryan Poles is doing right is, he's building the team from the inside out. And that's how you win championships. I mean, you can sugarcoat it all you want. You could select a receiver and a quarterback every year if you want to. You could, or a defensive lineman. But if the quarterback can't set up a throw and the wide receivers, is open and the quarterback can't see him because he's on his back, the most important thing about a passing offense is pass protection, not the quarterback, right? And not the receiver, because if the quarterback could be the greatest quarterback in the world, but if he can't set up and throw it. So I think, that's a key, and it's the key since, football, and, what is it now, 102 or 3 years? It's been that way for 102 or 3 years. It starts from the offense and defensive line. You win with the big guys. And I think they're doing it the right way. So when you do it the right way, then I think good things happen.
And that leads perfectly into the last question for the night. And Jim, all things considered, Ryan Poles has completely torn down this team and has really built a strong young foundation for the time coming. What are you thinking for the Bears this year? Record-wise, are they winning the North? What do you see from the 2023-2024 Chicago Bears?
It's hard to predict records and all that. I try to stay away from that, not because I want to go on record and know what their record are, and those guys come back and say, well, we won the division and you thought we were going to come in last. But it's just injuries, like you said, and things change and quarterbacks change, and that's the NFL. So, I mean, it's hard to do that, and circumstances change. So I think it's going to take them a while, a couple of years to hit their stride. I think it's going to take a few seasons for them to get the right people in place in the right positions. They got a quarterback, right? They got some receivers. They're getting some defensive players. I just think they got to put it all together, and get the right guys in the right spots. And then usually good things happen. And I think the other thing is leadership. I think they need some good leadership on that team. It usually starts with the big guys. And when you can get stuff like that happen, and I think you'll see some good things from these guys.
Well, excited to hear that, because there's a lot of, it's only up from last season, 3-14. It was a tough year to be a Bears fan, but it was all for all the right reasons. We're very excited about the future and excited to hear that you see the potential in them too. But Jim, thank you so much for coming on tonight. Really appreciate it. And it was an awesome getting to know you, and hopefully we can have you on soon.
You bet. Great to be here too. And have a good night.
And with that, thank you very much for joining this episode of Just Another Year Chicago. My name is Nick Rohde, joined alongside Jim Covert, and we'll see you guys next time.